Well, ho, 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 and welcome to the Curmudgeon's Dungeon. Actually, Curmudgeon in the Cellar, but it's a holiday, and so we're mishmashing stuff all up together. First thing to announce is this will be the last Curmudgeon of 2022, and I won't be doing another one until the, let's see, do I have a 2023 calendar here? I do. The one that'll come out on, you'll see it on January the 7th. Okay, I'm going to take the next two off. They would both come out on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and I'm sure we all got many more important things to do than ramble on about gaming on those two busy nights. If you have a family, you know what I'm talking about. If you're going out partying, you get it. Whatever you're planning on doing. So this will be the last one for a while. Thanks again to the Patreon people. I'm trying to get better at answering you and that. I just, it's something new, and it takes me a while to fit new things into the routine that I have. I'm working on it, I promise. And to that end, I might do a Q&A on maybe New Year's Eve. And if I do, I'll send you all the links and send all of you the link. Yeah, be precise here. And we'll do that then. I'm leaning strongly toward that. As far as the unfiltered videos, I was going to do one, and Jim talked me off the ledge because I was a little wound up. But I do have an enormous pet peeve. Right now, we'll just talk about that now. We'll do that first. Right now, there's a big brouhaha, big dust up going over artificial art, AI art. And if I were an artist working for hire, I would certainly understand why they're upset with it or think they ought to be. I don't know yet that it will pan out to be threatening to the good artists out there. And if you're an artist like me, middling at best and only teeny weeny like painting a castle on a 25 millimeter figure shield, we're not threatened. I can see the artists, and I have lots of good friends that I've bought art with and known in the game industry for a long time, and I certainly see their concerns. Because if you build a good enough algorithm, I guess it's feasible to look like you're Frank Frazetta. Now that would be wrong. We have something in fine arts called art forgery, and that to me seems to be right up that alley, or down that alley. As to how much, I'm not an artist, so I can't say how much of AI art is any good or not, and whether it can be helpful to a fine artist. I don't know. I certainly understand their concerns, and I'm trying to make myself better educated about the topic. All right, so there is a concern there. Now, in the same vague area of robots supposedly doing the work, I have a real gripe, and of course it's close to home because it seems like nobody, magazines, the magazines that I read anyway, the history magazines and whatnot, and some of the better magazines, they're the glossier ones or the higher toned ones, have done away with human editors. They've got these whiz-bang spell check programs, and if the word isn't misspelled, then it goes through. If it's the wrong word, but it's spelled correctly, it goes through. If it's an ambiguous word, but it's spelled correctly, it goes through. If it skips a word, omits a word, it goes through. I just recently finished a magazine that I've read for many, many years called Military Heritage. And I don't know if it's down to quarterly or if it's 6 a year now, and it used to be more frequent. And I've grown disenchanted with the military magazines of that sort anyway from this country, because they have gone over the same battles again and again and again. I do find an interesting British one every now and again because they tend to cover other fights and wars, battles, etc., that the American market doesn't. Be that as it may, this last Military Heritage, there were at least a dozen, to my old, tired, 74-year-old editor's eyes, glaring errors of omission, of wrong word. Come on. It only takes me, if I sat down to read that magazine from front to back, it wouldn't even take me a morning. And I can pick out 12 errors? I'm not saying I was the world's best editor. God knows my early magazines were full of problems, but we did get better. Anyway, that's my bitch right now to go. I'm going to throw that into the ring to go along with the AI art thing, and see if we can't get more editors, real live human editors hired. And speaking of editors, I got a story to tell you. Must have been back in 79. And early 79, late 78, I don't remember exactly. This guy walked off the streets, literally, into my office down in Lake Geneva in the old gray house, and said he was a writer for, I believe, the Beloit paper, and for whatever reason was looking for something else, and heard that I published a magazine, and was I looking to hire anybody? And eventually, couple commission pieces, a couple other tests, if you will, and then I ended up part-time, then full-time. And when I left, he became let's see, how was the structure? I think it was him, and then, yeah. In any event, when I left, he took over at Dragon Magazine. His name was Kim Mohan. I can't say that I got to know Kim exceedingly well personally. I did enjoy his company. He was a good worker. He was a good editor. He was a good writer. And I enjoyed the time we spent together at Dragon Magazine. And I first puzzled at his ability to keep his job through all the ownership changes, and then finally moving out to Seattle, and came to admire him for staying with the company through thick and thin. He did a few things with Dragon Magazine toward the end that I'm sure were brought down upon him by upper echelons of management. And he took the visionary magazine that we'd once had and turned it into a house organ. But I know the kind of corporate procedure, and you don't say, fuck you, and turn around and walk away at his age and that stage in the profession. Because even at that point in time, writing for our hobby didn't get any props with the mainstream. I know anyway, Kim died. I'm very, very saddened to hear that. I know his wife is devastated by it. I don't know his wife very well, but I do know her a little, and she's a lovely lady. And all I can do is say, Pam, you will feel better. I don't know when, but you will. And to the rest of us, I say, we lost a guiding figure all those years that he spent at the Dragon. Now, on to more topical things and less morbid. According to Mike, all right, this is a quote. I know the source, I know it to be accurate, and the source, the quote, and the person that sent it in, I know to be accurate. And this is in response to the questions about clerics that we had last time. There's a lot of stuff about clerics in here tonight. All right. According to Mike Carr, and this is a quote, when the Blackmore campaign was getting underway, Dave Arneson assigned me the role of village cleric, so I can proudly claim to be the first one of that character class, which is a pretty cool distinction, Card said. I had a small church, but not much else. My cleric wielded a mace since he was unable to use any edged weapons. As a low-level adventurer, my fighting ability was unremarkable, but I did have the ability to heal wounds on a limited scale, which proved to be somewhat useful to our party. End quote. There you have it. First cleric, Mike Carr. Now, keep in mind that Dave's campaign at that time was not structured. It didn't have the same structure to the characters in that the game does today. It was a static game with positions. Hi, you're him, you're him, you're him, you're him, you're him. And that's how it came about. It was not the experience point level upping, and anything. Not at this point in the Blackmore campaign. Now I have another response about my ignorance last time. My understanding is that Sir Fang was a vampire. Yeah, Dave liked to have players play villains against the other players. Hence, the cleric began as a Van Helsing-esque vampire hunter. Well, that might have happened later, but that doesn't exactly jibe with what Mike said, but Mike didn't go into a lot of detail, so that might well be it. However, I'll point out something here. I don't like DMs that, nor have I ever done, play player characters off against each other. I've never done that. I've always fostered party unity. I very heavily discouraged people stealing from members of the party. Now, it sometimes happened if they came under a charm or a geas or something of that nature. But no, thieves do not get rich stealing out of the pockets of the other players. That just, in my opinion, is not done if you're going to lean and trust on each other. Look at the knights at the dinner table. They might steal anything they can that isn't nailed down, but never from each other. Here's another one. On his input, to best his knowledge, Fang and the origins of the cleric came out of the Blackmore campaign. That part's right, yes. The specifics of the cleric class emerged out of gameplay. Healing and curing disease were added to address player difficulties. They weren't inspired by legends or biblical miracles. That came later when the class was developed for OD&D. I don't remember my sources of precisely. It's a combination of books on the early history of the hobby and blogs and comment, and it also may have been covered in the Secrets of Blackmore documentary video. I know that to be essentially correct. Again, bits and pieces I've picked up out of several sources over the years. That's essentially correct. The cleric did come out of the Blackmore campaign. Okay. Let's go away from that for a while. This Saturday, I'll be playing my first game with my friend's edited version of 5e. And on Sunday, I shall play my first game with another group that I promised to play with. I've started to use hexes for my maps, and boy, it helps. However, I still struggle with how much the party can travel and how many miles should a hex be, since my perception of distance sucks. Do you have any advice? Well, let's look at. I'm guessing that you're talking about outdoors and a grand scale map. Let's look at how many miles on good roads, or even just average roads, can a party expect to travel in a day, walking or horseback? You can find figures for that, average miles per hour, etc. You can find that plenty of places online. Find that figure. Now, when you find that for clear terrain, let's go walking across the meadows all day. All right, and you can even give them credit for being experienced hikers. That's a meadow with no obstructions. Now you start paring that down by the impediments you put out there: bogs, forests, brambles, briars, whatever, heavy underbrush, little underbrush. And you would figure, okay, if it's heavily wooded and very brushy, they can only travel half that distance in a day. So now the question becomes, how long they can travel in a day or a half day. How many hexes do you want that to represent? Do you want that to be, if your standard of movement is 35 miles, we'll pick that number out of the air. 35 miles for your party. 25 or 45 if you're mounted, okay. But we'll pick a number, 35. Do you want to spend the whole time in the hex? How big of hexes are you using? Are you using 1-inch hexes? That's one thing. Buy some of the bigger hexes. You can put more detail into the same hex and keep the distance the same. Many times in nights of the dinner table, they'll see them scratching their heads going, man, that's 4 hexes away. Which means, it's at least 4 days travel. You can make a hex a day's travel in ordinary clear terrain, whatever number you decide upon. Okay, remember they're not wearing Reeboks and Nikes. That's why magic boots or elven boots are such a big advantage in the early stages of the game, when the characters are still low rated. Heck, even when the characters are higher rated. You can travel farther. Do they make you run faster? No, but they make you more sure-footed and less likely to step on step in a dip or catch a root, simply because they're better made. Okay, that's why they're so much fun. So now, okay, you're using a 1-inch hex, and you decided you can move 35 miles in a day. Is your hex going to be 35 miles? Or do you want to decide that your hexes are going to be 5 miles? So they could move 5 hexes in a day. That gives you more scalability on those hexes. But whereas before you had a 35-mile hex, now you got 5-mile hexes, you got to draw all the hexes around all of those, at least 2 out, for zigs and zags and jogs and whatever. And now all of a sudden, your map is 3 times larger than it was. I can't give you the answers. What I did, and what I still do if I were doing that, I use a 40-mile hex, and if it's full of stuff, I draw another one out on a small sheet of graph paper, and that's the hex detail. This is where the pit is, this is where the wizard's hut is, that kind of thing. Yeah, you're drawing more, but only actually the big hexes. You'd draw if the hexes represented fewer miles, you'd be putting all that detail, trying to cram it in. See what I'm saying with this? It depends on how far do you want your adventures to go to the next adventure. Is it 75 miles down the river, or is it 340 miles across the continent, or 800 miles across the continent? Figure out how long it's going to actually take them to travel that distance. Figure out what kind of perils they should face along the way. Chances for wandering monsters. Okay, wandering monsters, it's really a misnomer. It should be miscellaneous monsters or random monsters, because while they may wander in the dungeon, they may be footpads or in the city, or a band of robbers in the woods. So all those things have to be factored in, but it's easier to do it on that small sheet, because on one of those sheets you can do a whole hex, all the detail you need to play it out. It's got to be based on how far you think they can move in a day. What kind of terrain? Are you running a desert campaign? Maybe only 30 miles a day. Maybe only in between oases. One day 40 and the next day 25. It's all legit. That's where if you're doing a 35-mile hex, that small hex, okay, here's this oasis, there's that oasis. It's really all I can say. Look along those lines and look down those alleys and see what will work best for you based on all the hot air I've just expended. It's what's worked for me. And so it's worked for me for a long time. We used to use the old outdoor survival board. I think every hex was 25 miles. And they were little hexes. Yeah, I understand what you're saying about perception of distance. But I think if you lock yourself into, okay, the 1-inch hex equals, that'll help firm a lot of that up. And if you want to adventure on your way there, then you would have to scope that out. I've written adventures where you had to adventure before you got to the main part of the adventure. I've written several of those. It's never easy to get where you want to go in something I've written. Thanks for the videos. I'm enjoying them. The random cat action and fire dissolves. And yeah, Jim told me about the fire dissolves. That was clever of him. Okay, question. Never split the party. When a party splits, how do you deal with that? Or what's your advice on this situation? Should DMs only let it happen if they plan for it? How do I deal with that? What's my advice? Kill the smallest part. I think it's a horrible idea. A horrible idea. And more often than not, a skillful DM, by the phrasing of his questions and the tone of his voice, can have an amazing influence on common sense. My old, all right, now tell me again exactly what it is you plan to do. That should get everyone at my table a little whoa up and think it through again to see if there might not be a flaw in it. Splitting the party is very, very seldom a good idea. Now, when is it a good idea? When you've got a party of 10, 12 or more players. And there are games that run like that, and I've done even many more than that many players in a game. Sure, because then the individual groups, unless they're really dumb, are going to be formidable enough in their own right. But if you split them, if you got four players, 4 PCs, and they split up, they're just asking to be picked off in detail. It's always been a sound military stratagem to try to pick off the enemy in detail and not let it happen to you. I don't say, oh, you better not do that. I might say, are you sure that's something you want to do? And if they, yes, it is, well, then I let them argue about it amongst themselves for a little while. And in this case, I let them have all the time they want because I really don't want them to do it. And if they persisted in doing it, and I wasn't able to dissuade them through subtle hints and voice tones, I'd make part of them leave the room. Go sit somewhere else. Go another part of the... If you're at a convention, they got to go away from the table. If you're playing at home, they got to go into another room. You can absolutely not have any... The parties, the groups, the groupettes, the grouplings cannot have any knowledge whatsoever of what's going on with the other. And if one gets defeated in detail, the other will have no way of knowing that until perhaps they're closed in on and defeated in detail. And maybe you're not dealing with multiple, bad guys chasing you down and stuff like that. However, a smaller party might get obliterated easier if they run into something truly powerful. Do I forbid it? No, not overtly. But if they want to go find a pathway off to the right so they can circle around or whatever, don't let them find one. The players are there to have fun. And unless it's people that I've played with for a long time and I know, where their heads are at, I don't facilitate reckless play where it's going to freak somebody out if they get croaked. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I had a question recently. In old school, if you failed to save versus poison, did you really die? And I said, yep, we really did. And if we saved, we still took half damage from neurotoxin damage in our systems. And I know, because I know how the later editions are going, that was a horrible idea. Have you ever nominated a player to assistant DM in a split party? Nope. Because I've never been in a situation where somebody that wasn't one of the players was just sitting around with nothing to do. Never had that opportunity. Don't know if I would. I wouldn't want to discourage it. Splitting your forces is so seldom a good idea. Now, I'm not talking about Delta Team and Special Forces and Rangers. Yeah, they're trained to operate in singly or in groups, pairs or threesomes. Our buddies sitting at the table are not. That's way, 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 way too much min-masking. That's kind of like 5e. Do I have any stories from my testing days on party splitting? Was it something that you tried in order to see what happened under testing? Well, as DM of that group in Carbondale, I never suggested that or indicated that we were going to do something, except when we rebooted after we got a hold of the copy of Greyhawk. and so we changed over our weapon damages and what have you. I never had them try something out to see if they all got croaked, because I didn't tell them they were playtesters. I didn't set out for them to be playtesters. It just came to be that Gary and I'd get to talking, and something had come up in my game, and so I handled it thus, and something had come up in one of his games, and he handled it that, and so we compared a lot of notes, tried out. I would, sometimes with his prompting, sometimes without, try out different spells and stuff like that. But never, oh yeah, why don't you guys play in split parties today? When it happened, and this is when I was running groups of 9 to 12 every Saturday. When it happened, it never came out well. And then when I talked to Gary the next time, and he goes, well, we usually start with, what horrible thing happened to your players since the last time we talked? And it often came up that one of it was a go, and then they decided to split up. And the other would say, oh, yours too? Are you kidding me? And so we neither of us ever had hardly ever had good results. It was usually very damaging, sometimes fatally damaging to the party members. And it was more of just watching them do it and fail, and watching them do it and fail. And he'd been watching them do it and fail longer than I had. But by comparing notes, that yes, I was seeing the same things he was. Okay, that's a valid observation, not just one person's opinion. When other people go, oh yeah, man, splitting a party hardly ever works. Now, you're chasing 5 goblins around a village. Oh, that's one thing. You go this way, you go this way, we'll go around the hut. That's one thing. Going off in opposite directions where you can't be immediately supportive, either outdoors or underground, is what we're talking about here, which, in my opinion, is hardly ever a good idea. This game involves dice. Therefore, stupid, illogical shit can sometimes happen. But hey, it's kind of what makes it fun. A shout out to the 7 Winds. The origins of the cleric is interesting in relation to DD as far as using kin over race. In the RPG I'm working on, use guild as a sci-fi game, but as a way of fantasy RPG, I think I would and still stick with race. That's fine. I find it a much easier. I'm going to be 74 next month, and I've had a lot of science and shit, all of the years of education I had, and the extra degrees and all that crap. And I'm not bragging about it. I'm simply stating my position here. Race is a lot easier to work with. This is part of the let's all redefine the words we've lived with all our life movement, because somebody thinks that that's demeaning. Well, it's a scientific term. So you're not wrong, but go with the flow. I'll use kin because I like it. I've been thinking lately about Paladins and Clerics, specifically how they relate to each other in the church structure. They don't necessarily. The closest I got was a vague notion that it had a structure akin to some branch of the armed forces. Paladins were officers and clerics were NCOs. My only lens on that structure is through Star Trek and MASH, so I'm clinging to this idea I barely know about and would like to know more. Okay. clerics are ordained or self-ordained or anointed or zipped by their deity on the forehead with a little mark. They recognize and worship a specific deity. They pray to that deity. They follow the deity's rules, regulations, and bylaws and guidelines. And by keeping in good standing with that deity, they are able to do what clerics do in however a manner that clerics do it in your campaign. Now, mine's not at talk right now, and I run clerics a lot differently. But that's who they are. And some people love to go out and play, brother razzle, and they gladly conk people for a tithe for their parish. And in their non-adventuring time, when they're between adventures and whatever, they work out with the DM that, okay, I've got how much? All right, I'm donating this much to, whatever. Now that's if they are serving a large organized religion or sect. If they're not, if they're part of something smaller, something cultish or whatever, well, then that's up to the DM. Part of the reason we put gods, demigods, and heroes out was to give people some ideas of, okay, these are some deities in many different cultures that you can follow. And they grant you the ability to do what you do as long as you stay in good standing. Now, the ones who don't go out adventuring, playing D&D or other role-playing games, I've always looked at it as more as the laity or the minor brethren or the whatever. It's really however you want to structure it. Now, paladins are a whole different thing. Read the Song of Roland. Roland was a paladin. There was Roland, however you pronounce it, and another knight who are they are famous in song and poem and whatever for having come back from the Crusades and doing good deeds, knightly things, protecting the weak, etc., and kind of as a rear guard, the last ones out of the Holy Land type of mission that they were on. And the Song of Roland is more than that, but that's a general gist. And there are others, not nearly as famous, but there are other examples of that type of person. They're not really a knight errant. They're a knight pious. In my opinion, except in limited circumstances, paladins are more trouble than they're worth. In my experience, particularly if you hand out paladins as a pre-gen, they invariably go to the person that wants to play them like they got a stick up their butt. And get in everybody's business and tell them what to do. That's why I don't care for them very much. However, a paladin can certainly interact with a group as an NPC, perhaps adventure along with them for a little while, but eventually leave and go off on his own quests and whatever. Paladins are the type who would go off on a quest, whether it's to find the Holy Grail or the toenail clippings of Dogbert or, whatever. They're the types that would do it. If they're lawful good or neutral good, they're going to react accordingly to things that aren't. If they're just very likely, if they see somebody, some wagon driver flogging his donkeys half to death, they might stop him because that's not a good thing to do. That's not a nice thing to do, and the donkeys didn't deserve that. If he's riding down the country lane and sees a landowner whipping his serfs brutally, he might very well stick his nose in and tell him, you're being a little brutal here. You're going to have a dead serf on your hand here, and I don't think you ought to do that. And then he might start stuff on his own. We've gotten into, over the years, the arguments about paladins and can they kill baby orcs and can they kill baby goblins and things like that. And still be considered paladins. Well, in any world, any campaign I ever run again, I will not encourage any player to be a paladin. And I'll make it tough, because it should be. If you're going to pledge to a lawful good deity, then I'm going to make sure everything you do is lawful good. And yes, as the DM, I'm the one who decides what's lawful good and what isn't. And I'm sure after a couple of head bumps, we'll come to an understanding of what I mean by lawful good and what he means by lawful good. Paladins are kind of like free agents. Now, that's not to say that they might not take on an errand for an abbey or a monastery somewhere or a nunnery somewhere or whatever, okay? They might do that. They might be out looking for, questing for something. But I don't see them so much as affiliated with a given deity. For Lord's sakes, there's so many deities available that it's a DM's nightmare. So if it's more about their alignment than about what deity it is. And as a DM, you got to stop such foolishness as a paladin saying, "Well, I worship John Deere, and he says it's okay to pluck the eyeballs out of baby races that I consider inferior." No, John Deere? Who the hell ever heard of John Deere? He made tractors. Okay, that's how I play it. That's how I look at it. Clerics are on their own hook. They may or may not have a temple they're affiliated with. They may be wandering clerics who occasionally will run across a temple which is either affiliated with or has an arrangement with one they are, and they can either deposit or transport their tithe home. Okay, that's what clerics are. I have seen a lot of clerics played as neutral good and neutral. And I really don't have a problem with that. Because there's a lot of tolerant deities out there, a lot of tolerant religion's more tolerant than others. And it adds a little spice. I heard you were in the Navy for no, not half a decade. I was in 4 years active and 2 years reserve. I'm curious as to know where you were in that structure, as well as how you viewed that relationship between officers and enlisted personnel. Um, I was in naval aviation. I was sent to Memphis, Tennessee to learn avionics, and I was further assigned to an intruder squadron, A6s, which at the time were the single most sophisticated aircraft in the arsenal, and certainly operating overseas. And because I was in a rate, aviation fire control, that had a great grasping need, I was able to advance rather quickly. I made E5 in 21 months. That's half again faster than any of the other services. And I wasn't even, I was barely out in the fleet, being not in a training command. I was barely out in the fleet when I was getting ready to sew on my E5. E5 is the same as a sergeant in the Army, a sergeant in the Marine Corps. I think it might be a sergeant in the Air Force, I don't know. Petty officer, second class. So that's an NCO. What did I think of the officers? I thought 2/3 of them were dumbasses. I thought the bombardier navigators, most bombardier navigators, as a fact, were washouts from pilot school, and they carried a grudge about it ever since. I met a couple that were actually in there to be that, and they were good at it because they were nerds and had a touch with the equipment. For the most part, officers were there to be fooled. You never openly disrespected an officer, but you paid as little attention to him as you possibly could. Now again, I was not in a deck crew or anything like that, so it was a lot different. We were Tweety birds. Everybody in aviation fire control, aviation radio, aviation electric, all that, we were all really bright guys because they were skimming off the highest results on the entrance test and sending them to electronics school. So we were kind of a quirky bunch to begin with. And I had some good officers. I had a bunch of officers that couldn't find their butt with both hands. I had a leading chief, was the biggest, well, actually a little short shit, who I think cheated on the height requirement, who was the biggest prick I ever ran into in the Navy. So, like most of the enlisted during my time of service, we referred to the officers as zeros because of the O on the sticker that allowed them to drive on and off the base. I know I didn't have a lot of the pilots didn't get a lot of assignments to be shop officers or division officers. But the bombardier navigators got shoved into those, and we had a couple of real dumbasses that just couldn't operate the systems. Every time they flew, they'd come back with the same gripe or maybe a new one. They weren't any good. We had to teach them how to use their equipment. We had to do it on the ground so they could do it in the air. We had to teach them the quirks of the radars that we had. And we had one who I suckered. He was a shop officer, meaning he was in charge of that might have been our shop. And I suckered him in front of a group. We got to chatting, and he agreed that I couldn't be prosecuted for my thoughts. And then he later agreed that thinking out loud was thinking. And so then I thought out loud about how he was the sorriest excuse for both a bombardier navigator and a shop, and I read him down for all his faults. But I was just thinking. And so he just sat there and fumed, and I'd set him up to where he couldn't do anything about it. That's kind of how we thought of officers. Now, the great irony, just before Desert Storm, which preceded just before Desert Shield, which preceded Desert Storm, my wife and 5 other nurses she worked with all went into the Army as officers in the medical corps. So now I find myself married to an officer. The joke was on me. And do I think there's a way to run with that concept in a setting beyond the surface level? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking there. We had everybody understood the chain of command. We knew who we had to obey right away. We knew which ones were more relaxed than others. We knew who the martinets were. My dad inadvertently taught me the greatest secret ever, and that's that everything's a game. The Navy's a game, work's a game. If you know the rules, follow the rules, you also know how to get around the rules. You know which rules to follow. The Navy was much like that in my time. Now, working on a flight deck, a whole different thing. Up there, whoever was up there was supposed to be up there. If they give you a signal to move out, you did it, no matter if it was enlisted or an officer. The whole thing was off. Okay. Oh. Okay, where am I? I seem to... Okay, this is a follow-up to the other individuals, Paladin, Cleric. Suggest perhaps looking at a history of the knights compared to fighting priests might be help. Yeah, there were religious orders that fought. There were religious orders of monks in Japan that were a huge political force during the period of all the wars. And when the monks came down off the mountain armed, shit was going to hit the fan. Knights had a more complex connection to the religion than priests, though there was a steady decline in the morality of knights. Yeah, if you look at the knights, I don't think the Templars and the Knights Hospitale are, I don't think of them as paladins, not in a group. Now that lone guy who still has his principles, got it. I can see Rutger Hauer making his way across a war-torn Europe, trying to adhere to his principles. One easily accessible source might be of interest is Aguirre, The Wrath of God, by Werner Herzog, which shows a Spanish force of conquistadors invading the Amazon around 1560. His depiction of a warrior priest who took up arms and urged the conquistadors to terrible violence for the glory of his god is particularly striking and may serve as an archetype of a cleric for you. Ooh, I hope not. There were some Looney Toonies that ended up with the conquistadors, and very few of them would I use as an example for anything. Let's see what else is here in this thing. While the paladin might be the more complex figure of the knight, serving their god by serving the king, queen, or priest, and holy violence against enemies pronounced by their leaders. Well, that's a good excuse. God wills it. Look at the Crusaders. what's the movie with I'll think of it in a minute. God wills it. That was a Crusaders battle cry. God wills it, and got him slaughtered at the Horns of Hatton. How do I envision Berserkers? Do you like the idea of a player one or not? Well, I kind of look at Berserkism, as a form of as something comparable to a lycanthropy. If I was going to get into that, I'm sure that there's enough examples in literature that Berserkers probably produce babies, and maybe it's something in the blood, or maybe it's something they got from, right? But I kind of look at it as you can have a streak in there because it's a temper thing. That once you go beyond a certain point, you go berserk, literally. And like a lycanthropy, you learn to control it. Like lycanthropy, it can be forced upon you on a sudden stress. That's how I would handle it. I can't envision right now a way that I would inflict berserkism on a player character, but they'd certainly make interesting non-player characters or monsters, wouldn't they? I had in my original campaign, the first campaign, I had somebody that was bit by a weird bear, and he mastered his lycanthropy, and it took he had a 94% chance of keeping it under control under any circumstances. And he also could bring it on whenever he wanted. But it took him a long time to do that. It made him go find a druid that knew about these kinds of things and stuff like that. But, anything should be overcome. What historical period does your game, Arms and Armor, most fit? None, because I like all kinds of weapons. You might find a magical bronze Egyptian sword, and you might find a fine Toledo steel type rapier. It's fantasy. No gunpowder. You'll never find gunpowder. But otherwise, it's pretty much a polyglot. Probably nothing beyond 1400 or thereabouts. Except maybe the occasional pirate weapon. Just because they had some neat ones. Okay, now this is a response to something. And there's a response to it. Okay, this is about, I also hate the one D&D, also known as OD&D for some reason. I don't like the one D&D title for the next WotC edition. I theorize that they did it so that Google and other search engines show the newest edition and not the 1974 original, so that newcomers won't learn about the old TSR, Gary, Dave, Kuntz, and your work, and put their place in the hobby's history. They only want to sell their half-written and confusing rule books, mediocre railroady adventures, ton of miniatures, and a generation of overwhelmed gamers since 2000, and newcomers that don't know how the game and the hobby changed. There's a hope, though, for the hobby, as there are a lot of great old-school role-playing games, Swords and Wizardry, for example, Hyperborea for another one, and I lost my place, that have cleaned up the rules and have really captured a close spirit of the original first edition, basic, and made it possible for all to read and get it with no fee. Now this is, I don't fully understand this yet, but I understand if you're going to play D&D, it's going to cost you on a more regular basis than it did already. We'll see. again, everything is speculation at this point. Nobody's got the stolen plans from the secret meeting at Hasbro. Now, in response, someone else wrote, there's absolutely no way this is the case. Wizards aren't at all worried about a 40-year-old edition. There isn't enough people playing the gold games for it to even be a remote threat. One D&D is just a catchy name and a way to market it as a service instead of a product. There we go, service instead of a product. Well, I think it's pretentious because everybody that plays fantasy knows about the one ring to rule them all. Well, one D&D, the ring to rule them all. That bothers me. Maybe that's not their point, but I doubt it. They've got some clever people at Hasbro. I doubt that they did that for the purpose of hiding older information. Generally, Googling that, it's the newest, freshest stuff that after the ads that comes up when you search for something. And yeah, there's not enough of us playing the old games to be a threat. I just think it's more pretension than marketing to call it one D&D, because I think some of their sanctimonious preaching over the last couple of years is enough to make a sane person vomit. The point of D&D is to have fun. Play whatever edition you want. If you don't like theirs, don't. Now, granted, role-playing's not cheap. Got a couple, 3 hardbounds, got dice, all that stuff. I'm not sure because I haven't bothered to read it in detail, but from what I'm picking up in bits and pieces here and there, it's going to be something like a subscription service. And it's going to keep sucking money out of you. Well, if you're a devotee of any hobby, you willingly gush forth the money. I don't know. I'm waiting to see the full. Okay, right now it's just, I've seen play tests, I've heard that, I'm waiting to see it before I go out on a limb and perhaps make a fool of myself. Because, hey, I don't really care what edition you play. Anybody that is interested in the history of the game will go back and read about where it started from. The rest of the people don't care. That's okay. I don't care how Monopoly started. I know, but only because I saw it. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's how it started, huh? Okay, I didn't go out searching for the origins of Monopoly. And I don't know that anybody else, I don't know how many people go out to see the origins of Chinese checkers, or Pachisi, or D&D. Something about one D&D rankles. That's all. And I think that's all. Gonna finish all the recordings for the D20 Delving couple days after you see this, and looking forward to that. It's going to be a great project, and I think it's going to be a game changer type game. And no more Curmudgeon until the new year. So, happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, or Merry Kwanzaa, I'm not sure. Merry Christmas, God Yule, happy holidays. Have a good time in these next couple of weeks. Get together with family and friends, because you can never have too much together time with family and friends, because before you know it, you don't get any more. And I don't mean to be morbid. So, happy holidays, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Hello, and welcome to my Cellar. He's the Curmudgeon.
curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree,
High as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.